and his throne. Where did Christ go in his ascension? There. Yeah, I'm actually pointing at the screen. Yeah, he went there to heaven. Okay. Jesus is very clear in Matthew 28 that all authority, all power is given unto me where? Is there any realm that Christ does not rule? No. Again, going back to that idea of supreme authority, okay, that having the scepter, okay, that symbol of authority. We know that he gets the crown as well. So we're looking at an authoritative position that he now holds after he's caught up into that particular place. All authority is Christ, and he sits at the right hand of the throne of God. Again, the right hand, if somebody is your right-hand man, right, and maybe our parlance, so he might be your partner in crime or something. But your right-hand man, that person that sits at the right hand of the throne of God, is the most trusted of the one on the throne. So we're looking here at the authority that the Christ has, sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. Again, that position of preeminence. Paul would say something about this in Colossians 3. If you then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where what? Where Christ sits at the right hand of the throne of God. Okay, so again, we see Christ enthroned there next to God. When we beheld the throne room scene in chapter 5 of this work, what did we see next to the throne as it was emanating these thunders and lightnings and voices and things? Yeah, the Lamb of God. It's okay, you can say it. The Lamb of God, you're absolutely right, who is standing next to the throne, okay? The Lamb as it had been slain before the foundation of the world. So Jesus' position next to the Godhead there is seen almost kind of foreshadowing the events that are going to come when we're looking at those first 11 chapters from a macro or big picture perspective. So again, the authority there of Christ in chapter 12. And what is this going to do for the readers? Because we always need to tie this back into those who received it. What's this going to do for them when they hear this? Comfort. Yeah, this is the fulfilled promise, right? This is a good thing. Okay, God has sent his Messiah, fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. So there's great encouragement there. Even though things look bleak, especially with this dragon that is now in the picture, we can see that God has executed his plans and accomplished them, and there is a purpose, and there is rule and authority that this figure has, okay? Then we get to the woman. The woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, again, verse 7. Sorry, that's on there, but the woman is representative of Israel, that is the remnant, and God's people. And like we mentioned already, it's a shifting analogy. It's moving. So at the beginning, we have God's people who are set aside, like we said. Then we have the pregnant woman, right, who is about to give birth, which is Israel, waiting on the expected Messiah who is going to come. And then after he comes and fulfills his work, then the woman becomes the saved of all of the ages, the elect, okay, God's people. So we're looking at this shifting analogy with the woman as it changes based on her state with the delivering of this person. So keep that in mind. Again, in verse 1, we see the woman is Zion, Israel, who brings forth the child. She's figured as the church that is fleeing into the wilderness now. Now, why would the church be fleeing, or what would this be kind of indicative of? Yeah. You run or you scatter when you're being persecuted, okay? Yes, sir?
Is this supposed to have us envision Hagar? This is a word picture that God provided for her, just like he's going to provide for his church. They might be in hiding or whatever, but they're going to grow during this time.
Well, so, I mean, did Hagar resort to the wilderness? Yes, she did. Was she, cast out of Abraham's house and told to go? Yes, she was. And did she have confidence in God? Yes, she did. Thou art the God who sees. But I would say it's only a passing figure. Now, in Galatians 4, Paul deals with the two figures, right, the seed of Ishmael and Isaac, and talks about them back and forth. But I don't know that I would go so far as to say that John is figuring Hagar here so much as he's figuring or a symbol, the imagery of Hagar and bringing that to recollection, as he is to all those who were God's people who he took care of who went into the wilderness. So it wasn't exclusively Hagar who was taken care of by God. There were several other folks, as we'll see. Moses fled into the wilderness and was cared for in Midian, went to Jethro's house, and then even coming back and taking Israel into the wilderness, they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and what did God do? He took care of them and their needs. Again, so the wilderness idea and them fleeing into the wilderness gives them the impression of God's provisions when things look bleakest, right? When we are without our creature comforts, without those things that make us feel, I guess the most at home, okay, the wilderness, the desert places, would be those areas that are not populated, okay, outside of civilization, with the idea that we're cut off from everything, including our families and even our histories and heritages and all that. So now they're in the wilderness. What do they have to lean on? Well, the church has been cut off from their heritage. They've been cut off from their families, those individuals who have responded. Jesus is very clear. I've come to set mother against daughter, father against son. I brought not peace but the sword because of the preaching of the gospel and what it did to those families. So yeah, they're going to feel isolated and alone. And what you have here is indicative of Satan's assaults on the church, but whose ultimate care and provision? God. Right? Elijah fled into the wilderness. What was the circumstances behind Elijah's flight, by the way? Anybody know?
Well, the prophets of Baal have just been crucified or killed, whatever you want to say, at Mount Carmel, when they proved that God was God and Baal was false. And he's fleeing because he's afraid of Jezebel.
Okay, so Elijah, again, is fleeing because of persecution, right? Persecution by Ahab and Jezebel. Now, he just won a great victory, was confirmed that God was with him, but again, he's afraid or concerned for his life because of the persecution. So again, we get the idea, the picture that God's people flee from persecution into the wilderness where they can't be found or sought. Obadiah, by the way, hid several prophets of God during the Jezebel persecution of God's prophets. Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt. Why? Because of Herod and what he decided or determined to do and the slaughter of the innocents, right? So we look at them leaving those places or spheres of persecution or harm. Paul went into Arabia. But again, that's the idea of fleeing into the wilderness and depending on God. So there's a consistent theme that the people of God leave the persecuting city or the opponents behind and flee to be in the presence and protection and care of God. So that's exactly what we're seeing here unfold in chapter 12. We get this great adversary who's depicted for us, who is waiting, okay, to kill the child, waiting on this woman to deliver so that this child can be killed. Once this child is delivered and brought into the world, he's caught up in a very quick way, and he doesn't have the opportunity to do that. And now, what does he do? Well, he's turning against the woman, and the woman flees into the wilderness, okay? So that's the imagery, that's the picture. The church fleeing from persecution from these things, but protecting or being protected by God. Yes, sir?
Could this be a anti-type with Nero's persecution and the destruction of Jerusalem?
So if you're of the pre-70 AD mindset, it might be. I don't particularly subscribe to that view, and therefore I don't understand this to represent that.
Not necessarily prophesying that, but alluding to what occurred during that time frame as well. So not necessarily saying that this is prophetic of the destruction of Israel, but using it as a type, any type, saying, okay, because of Nero's persecution of the church, especially there in Israel, fled into the wilderness, the protection of those saints in Jerusalem.
I mean, it might be. There would be some challenges to that. I mean, again, so it wouldn't match in several particulars, and that would be where the caution would be. I would say, generally speaking, we can look at in general principles and see kind of the bigger picture here, that God takes care of those who are being persecuted by the adversary. And that even though things might seem like they are insurmountable, in fact, we'll see, this dragon that is figured for us seems to be invincible, right? He's got 7 heads, 7 crowns, 10 horns. This thing is not something that you want to tango with, and yet we see God's provisions for those that are defying it, and him taking care of them. Now, interesting point about Nero and the Neronian persecution and some of those things that arose. But I don't even think the Neronian persecution stretched into the province of Israel, or what we would call the Levant there at that time. That was a completely different type of war. It had nothing to do really with Christianity. So, but interesting thoughts, certainly. So, any other thoughts on this? Excellent. So again, this is the theme that's seen here in chapter 12, them fleeing into the wilderness and being taken care of by God. Israel was nurtured in the wilderness by God with manna from heaven, right? So God took care of their physical means and physical sustenance when Israel was in the wilderness. Now, spiritual Israel is now where? In the wilderness, right? Metaphorically speaking, they're scattered to the winds. And so what does God take care of them with? Not actual manna, but the new spiritual Israel is nurtured by God with the bread of life, that is Christ. Jesus would say in John 6, in verse 47, "Truly, truly, I say unto you, he that believes on me has everlasting life. I am that bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead." Again, note the physical provisions there. "This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die." Spiritual provisions, God taking care of his own and his own people. Jesus making that abundantly clear. So we get to see kind of maybe a coming together of this imagery of Christ as the bread of life, sustaining his people in these difficult and challenging times. And now we get to the passage that everybody's been waiting for. And you're like, come on, just out with it. And we are there. Any thoughts, by the way, on what we've covered thus far? Okay, so, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has but a short time." Okay. Anybody want to do the honors and explain what's going on here? You probably think, well, that's why we're in this class. This is what we wanted to know about. So just at first glance, what do we see? A war, conflict, right? So we know there's two sides, okay? And who are the two sides that are opposed? What's that?
Good and evil.
Good and evil, God and Satan, okay? What else do you see?
God
Yes, sir.
wins.
What's that?
God wins.
Okay, God wins.
One thing interesting to me is there's no time stamp.
No timestamp except for that.
Just, there was.
Yeah.
Could have been talking about in the past, could have been talking about, this is in the future, but that to me at least
Could have.
stands out.
And we'll deal with that. You're excellent. So TJ makes the remark that we don't see a timestamp like we've seen in a lot of the other places. We just get this regular, Eris, there was war in heaven. Which, by the way, that's not even in there. They actually supply the verb. But that may be just because of the grammatical construct. So anyway, we look at this, there being war in heaven. Anything else?
He was overcome by
Oh, go ahead.
He was overcome by Christ, the blood of the Lamb.
Okay, absolutely. So he's overcome key. They overcame him. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. That's certainly a key part of this whole thing, and we'll dissect that. Yes, ma'am?
I was just going to say it's interesting to note in verse 9 that it wasn't the devil by himself. He had angels with him who were on his side.
Yep, so it was more than just the adversary singular, wasn't it? Okay? And the dragon fought and his angels. So there's more than one bad force against God.
He indicates to the woe of the inhabitants of the earth.
And that woe is for what reason?
It indicates to individuals possibly on the earth.
Yeah, because now Satan's coming down. He's been cast down, and where's he? He's been cast out of the heavens. He's been cast out of heaven and to the earth. So we'll talk about that, certainly.
His time is limited.
Yeah, he has a short time, so there's very limited time. Interesting. So what do we make of all of this? Now, here's the thing. We need to understand that we are in a book of what? Symbols. So do we automatically leave the symbolic picture and go to a prose narration of things that happened in the past? Have we done that thus far? Anybody? No, we've not. Okay. Post chapter 3, right? And we could argue for some symbolism there, but we're not going to undertake that this morning. But post chapter 3, that is chapter 4 up till now, what has been the crux of the text? It's all been imagery, hasn't it? Imagery that has meaning that's relevant for the group that it was written to. Now, I want us to understand that hermeneutically, if we just stop looking at the imagery and go straight to a literal figure, then we become guilty of doing what we accuse others of doing all the time, don't we? Okay, others stop in chapter 7 and take the 144,000 sealed as a literal number. And we get up in arms about that. And then in chapter 20, we look at this new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. Others take that as a literal representation and narrative, a prose narrative of what is going to happen. Again, we understand that symbolically, figuratively in many respects. So now we're stopping here in chapter 12, or individuals are, and saying, no, this is literal. Well, okay, there might be some elements that confirm a literal telling of this, but not in this respect, okay? This is a very unique passage in what it doesn't say, okay? In 2 Peter, we talked about already, and in Jude, we look at the war that's in heaven, and automatically we think, okay, war in heaven, we need to go right here because Revelation 12 is talking about that very war. I would argue this is an entirely different conflict in several respects because of the narration that it's in and the imagery that is seen here. And the consequence, okay? And we'll talk about that this morning because that's really important. Now, if you leave here and say, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and I believe it's 2 Peter, hey, great, good on you. But I just want to offer a proposition as we look at this text this morning to show you that we don't have to break the symbolic narrative that we've seen and the imagery that we've seen thus far to understand this text and go straight back to a literal narration of something that may have occurred in the past. Beginning in this passage here, there was war in heaven. Now, the term meganata is not actually in the text. It starts out with a dative, and it may be an articular infinitive, which is long-term to say that we jump right into the middle of it. Okay, there's a term in Latin called this in medias res, right, in the middle of things. So I don't know that necessarily it has to be an aorist that is used here. It may be, and we move into this discussion, but what we see is war in heaven. Really is as the text unfolds. War in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon fought and his angels. And now again, he's seeing these things, he's visualizing these things, and prevailed not, neither was their place found anymore in heaven. So again, this verse here tells us that they did not win. Now John's given the vision of a defeated adversary, okay, not one that who's accomplished or overcome. Satan's forces are cast down. Now, the dragon is not invincible as well. So when we look at this figure in this particular narration, we need to understand that the adversary, and for them to see this, need to know that this is something that can be overcome. Now, maybe not by them, but by the God of heaven. Now, Michael, his name means who is like God, and he leads the opposition force against Satan in this vision. By the way, have we seen Michael before anywhere else in the Bible? What's that?
Daniel.
Daniel, yes. Okay. Anywhere else? See him in Jude. Okay. So Michael does seem to play a prominent role in the spiritual world when it comes to the forces of good and evil. Okay. Is Michael fictitious and made up? No, he is not. He is a real, that was a trick question, by the way. He's not, okay? He is, by all accounts, a real angelic being who actually does commune with God's people and does assist in carrying out God's plans for God's people. Now, Michael figures prominently in the book of Daniel. Thank you, Lindsay, for bringing that up. Here he says, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Daniel 10 and verse 13. What do you notice about this passage, and what seems odd about this? Now, this is in light of answering Daniel's prayer, okay? And there were some problems, and this angel, okay, did what? Look who's the subject is, came to help me. So we're not looking at a man, we're looking at an angelic being who has been sent to answer Daniel's prayer. But look at what this angel says about what happened. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. By the way, there was no prince of Persia at this time. Okay? And what does it say of Michael? What does it call him? One of the chief princes. Interesting. So now we get two angelic beings that are called princes who are now opposing one another. What does this indicate?
Seems like a conflict of good and evil.
Good and evil, yeah. This would go back to the war that is going on between God and Satan, between spiritual forces. Okay? In 2 Kings chapter 6, Elisha's servant is concerned about the army that's been arrayed against Samaria. And in that text, Elisha prays that his servant's eyes be opened. And when they were opened, he saw those that were standing against Samaria, and then those angels or angelic forces that were standing against the Syrian army. And Elisha makes the statement there that those that are with us are greater than those that are with them. So what that tells us is that in all of these spiritual battles and conflicts, that Paul is 100% accurate when he says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now again, this term prince being applied to Michael also shows us that there is a prince or a chief of the kingdom of Persia. And so there are opposing forces in the world that are governing different seemingly areas geographically, or at least have them under their control or dominion. And God exercises dominion over the nations in some respects through these figures. Now, we also see this in Daniel where he says, so that you may know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. Okay, so we know that God plays an instrumental hand in ruling in national affairs and national conflicts. Now, when it comes to Daniel's prayer, Daniel, being a faithful and obedient servant to God, makes this prayer. An angel comes to deliver this prayer to him, but he is withstood by another angel. Now, what man can withstand an angel? None. If one angel can kill 185,000 people, if the angel of death can go through Israel, well, it may not be an actual angel like this, but something else, and that's a whole other discussion for another time. But we look at God's forces in the spiritual realm, executing that kind of power and strength. There's no man that can stand or oppose an angel. So what we see here is conflict between good and evil and an angel of darkness, okay? again, one of those ministers that is referred to in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, where Paul is talking about Satan's angels being transformed into ministers of light. So again, Michael comes to help him, and he remains there with the kings of Persia. Chapter 10 as well, in verse 20 and 21, he says, "Then said he, Do you know wherefore I am come unto you? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia." Again, going back to this spiritual warfare. He says, "When I am gone forth, lo, the prince of" who? "Greece shall come." So now we get more than one authoritative figure named in the text that is ruling in this particular way. All right, so this is very intriguing. He says, "But I will show you that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holds with me in these things." But who? But Michael, your prince. So again, the archangel Michael, right? And he's depicted multiple times as taking care of the people of God and having an authority in that respect and in that vein. Chapter 12 and verse 1, he says, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of thy people. Again, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was seen. There was a nation even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." Interesting, we've already seen imagery of a book, haven't we? Or we will later on in Revelation. What book is that? Yeah, the Lamb's Book of Life. Okay, so, and what does he say? There will be a great time of persecution against the people. Which kind of people? God's people. Okay, so this could be even prophetic of, okay, the Christian dispensation. If we're looking at Daniel chapter 12, we know that it's prophetic utterance. Daniel's in the Babylonian captivity. They will return not very long from the writing of this. So we don't know that the persecution is necessarily going to be in the Maccabean revolt or those kinds of things, but typically lean more towards the persecution by Rome. So again, a great persecution against them, but they will be delivered. And those that are found in the book. Again, we could reference the Lamb's Book of Life there. Now, here's Jude's remark about Michael. Jude says, "Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, did not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee." So when it came to even Michael, one of the chief princes of God, arguing against the adversary, what was his disposition toward the adversary? Did he revile him and rebuke him? Yeah, he said the Lord, he had a deference to the position that the adversary had and said, "The Lord rebuke thee." Okay, so this is unique as well about the antagonist. Now again, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of" who? The archangel. Do we know of any others? Gabriel. Is he an archangel? Does it call him an archangel? I'll have to go back and look. This is presumably Michael, though, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. We don't know for sure. It doesn't say, but it does say the archangel. Michael is the one that plays the largest role in the biblical text. Gabriel, messenger angel, coming to those figures. So again, what the text does tell us is that there is a legitimate spiritual war going on. And there are actual competing figures, and that war is not something that just happened once a long time ago, that it seemed to be an ongoing process, all right? And that helps us maybe understand a little bit more about chapter 12 as we continue into it. Paul would say we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against what? Principalities. Now, it's interesting, what did he call those chief individuals of Persia and Greece? And even Michael? Princes. Okay, so again, you have this same kind of root, principalities, those authoritative figures. He says, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. So just as light has a ruler, which is who? God. So darkness has rulers as well, and those who champion its cause against God's elect and against spiritual wickedness in high places. Okay, some of your translations may read, does anybody's read heavenly places? Yeah, so again, the idea of the heavens or heaven being the spiritual realm, the realm that we are not privy to see, but that lays alongside of our reality. So 1 Peter talks about Christ, and he says, who has gone into heaven and is on the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers being made subject to him. So again, note, you have two hosts, right? Two armies. And we call God Lord of Sabaoth. That's not a fancy way to say Lord of Sabbath, okay? Sabaoth means Lord of the armies, Lord of the hosts, okay? And we sing that in our song, Lord of hosts, okay? And holy, 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 Lord God of hosts. That's a reference to God being a God of the angelic hosts, okay? Again, Christ talking about God sending those legions of angels to his aid on the cross if he so wanted them. We will pick up here next week and finish out, hopefully, this discussion. But I appreciate your attention this morning.